alamin wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Therefore, guard your concerns. Be preoccupied with addressing your faults from not seeking out the faults of others.
MashaAllah. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So we're continuing on in this quest of reflecting upon these meanings of this great text of Imam al-Muhasibi, treatise for the seekers of guidance, Risalat al-Mustarshideen, and we are ending towards the first chapter. Imam Zayd divided it into 10 chapters, and he did so not based upon any chapter divisions that existed in the original book, but just to give it a bit of a flow so that we can break it up into parts. And he says here, therefore, guard your concerns. Be preoccupied with addressing your faults from not seeking out the faults of others. And that might sound like it is a simple thing to do, but in reality it is actually something very difficult. And that if Allah Ta'ala wants good for someone, that He gives him knowledge of his own faults. And this is one of the great du'as that we can make. Allahumma bassirni bi'uyubi nafsi, O Allah, cause me to be cognizant of my own faults. And that Imam al-Ghazali mentions 4 different ways that we can come to know our faults. The first and best way to come to know your faults is to have a teacher who reads with you the type of books that help you uncover that there are such things called diseases of the heart. One of the great Imams said that if we don't study the diseases of the heart, someone might die being in a persistent state of committing major sin and not even know it. If someone doesn't study that there are such things called diseases of the heart, they might die with arrogance in their heart and not even know. And so that this is a very serious matter, and that we have to be aware that there are things called diseases of the heart. And for us to know those diseases is something that is essential. So the first and best way is to have a teacher who helps you come to know this. The second is to have a friend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That someone that is to have someone that a good friend, not just a friend who's going to flatter you and tell you how good you are, but to have a friend that is a friend in the path and will notify you that, I think it's better that you leave this, or I think it's better that you do this or leave this. And that the foundation for this is in the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ and his companion Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, is that one of his ikhwan fillah, one of his brothers for the sake of Allah, was Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi. And that he asked him one day, is that there anything that has reached you that you've heard about me that you dislike? And he says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, that there's nothing that's reached me about you that I've disliked, except that I've heard that you have a garment that you wear in the morning and a garment that you wear in the evening. And that at times when you sit down to eat food, is that you will gather together with bread that 2 different types of dishes that go along with your bread. And subhanAllah, he said, then Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab said to him, he said, as for these 2 things, فَقَدْ أُفِيتُهُمَا, that I've been sufficed of them. Is there anything else? Yani those were his faults. His faults is that he had a garment that he wore in the morning and a garment that he wore in the evening. And then when he sat down with bread, is that he actually had bread with 2 different types of condiments as opposed to 1. La hawla wa la quwwata. If we went home for iftar and our wives didn't cook 5 different dishes, what would we say? And one time Sayyidina Umar, he noticed that his son, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar, that he had 2 dishes eating with bread, and that he said to his son that on one day eat bread with salt, on the other day eat bread with honey, on the other day eat bread with just alone. And then just teaching them that this was their state, was that they were people that preferred the akhirah over this world. But if you put it into perspective, it's important at least to have a perspective. If you look at what Imam al-Ghazali says in the Khayl-Madin on the chapter on Zuhud, on asceticism, and that even the translation of which there's parts in The Alchemy of Happiness, which exists in English, is that his standards for zuhud, for it to be considered zuhud, in terms of food, is he had 3 different levels. And these are the 3 levels to be considered zuhud. Anything beyond this is not from zuhud. Someone is just munhamak, they're just engrossed in the world. And that the degrees are so hard, it's just subhanAllah, this is just something that you read about people of the past. But you have to at least know that perspective exists, so that we can see and compare ourselves to where we're really at and where we're supposed to be. And Allahumma siru ilallahi urjan wa makasir, that we have to travel to Allah that's paralyzed, and that we have to travel to Allah partially paralyzed and even with broken bones. Yani, yallah, we do our best, and we try at least to cut back and to refrain, especially in this noble month of Ramadan. This is not a time, I know it's part of many of our cultures, that we have special foods that are made in Ramadan and so forth, and these are good things, these are good cultural norms. But from another perspective as well, is that a little bit of zuhud in Ramadan is good. Is that if we gain weight in Ramadan, it's a problem. We should not be gaining weight in Ramadan. Right? If we're going to get the reality of Ramadan, is that we should actually come out Ramadan a bit lighter and have shed some of those excess pounds. So, this is the second way, is that you have a friend for the sake of Allah Ta'ala who helps you that overcome. The third way is to look at other people. And when you look at other people and you notice is that they have certain faults, your intention is not to chastise them or to notice that in them, but to apply it to yourself. So if you've ever seen, like if you're in an airport or something, and that you see a man completely lose control and start getting really angry at like his spouse or whatever it might be, that you see that, you're like, oh my God, right? It's like there's something you notice that there's something wrong with that, right? Or if you see someone that is just totally rude to a flight attendant or whatever it might be, you see these types of things and you notice that it's wrong. And that the point here is that you have to notice wrong for wrong, but you apply it to yourself. Like, do I do that? And then you want to make sure that you uproot that, from the way that you are. That is the third way. The fourth way to come to know your faults is to listen to what your enemies say about you. And that if you have people that don't like you, that it's actually a blessing from this standpoint, because is that people that don't like you, all they do is notice your faults. That is one of the Arab poets says that عين الرضا عن كل عيب كليلة ولكن عين السخط تبدي المساوي, is that the eye of contentment, that they just overlook all of your faults. But if someone doesn't like you, if they're discontent, the eye of discontentment is that all they do is notice your faults. And so actually listening to your critics is a good thing, because that you can learn things about yourself, and that we should be people that actually welcome criticism. And that as one of the Salihin said, is that this is not so much related to criticism, but it's from the same standpoint. It says that there's no way that someone can lower me or humiliate me more than I humiliate or lower my own self. Meaning that if a person has a big nafs, when they're criticized, right, they're ready to lash out. But if you've already attempted to put your nafs down, and you've rebuked your nafs time and time again, and you've really had, and it might sound like if you went to a psychiatrist, they'd probably think you're crazy. But the Salihin, this is what's called siyasat al-nufus, governance of the soul, is that they actually imagine their nafs as a person. They personify their nafs, and they speak to it, right? And they rebuke it, and they chastise it, and they put it down in order to quell the power that nafs has over the individual. Because ultimately, is that in order to truly arrive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knowledge of Him, is that the nafs, by scholarly consensus, is the biggest veil. And what does our Lord say? وَإِمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. This is Quran. This is a Quranic understanding. This isn't some understanding of people that are called goofy Sufis that just kind of live off in the jungle and that type of thing. This is Quran. As for those who fear the standing before their Lord, or the station of their Lord, and that they prevent their nafs, their soul, their ego, their self, from its caprice, right? That their resting place will be paradise. And so meaning that this is our deen, is learning how to say no, to the caprice of the nafs. And so that by listening to the what your enemies say about you or your critics, is that you can learn things about yourself, and that if we really do have faults, that we should, whether or not it's someone likes us or they don't like us, if they show us our faults, we should be happy. And thus Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab said, Rahimullah Imran Arafa Ahda Ilayya Uyubi. May Allah have mercy upon someone who gifts me my faults. He sees someone teaching about his faults as a gift. Imam Ghazali says that if you're sitting in the desert and a scorpion comes up on your shoulder, and someone comes up and right knocks it off your shoulder, right? Are you going to be like, who do you think you are to hit me like that? Be more gentle when you knock that scorpion off my shoulder, or whatever it might be. Whoever that person is, man, woman, old, young, whatever, you're going to be happy that you didn't get stung by a scorpion. And that the diseases of the heart, unfortunately, in the next world, is that they translate, these are meanings, but translate after that into painful torments and punishments in the grave. Don't just give me 1 minute. We're having problems in this online connection. I'm going to try to log in. Just bear with me for 1 minute, inshallah. So be preoccupied with addressing your faults from not seeking out the faults in others. Bismillah.
It used to be said, it is sufficient proof that a person's character is flawed, that he finds in others the same faults he himself possesses, yet they are hidden from him. That he hates in people things he himself does, that he offends those sharing his company, or that he discusses other people's business when it is not his concern.
La ilaha illallah. And that these things, that they might seem minor, but they used to see these all as signs of someone's character being flawed. Is that it's very easy for you oftentimes to notice the faults in others, but you don't notice them in yourselves. We are self-deceived by nature. Is that this is part of human nature. Self-deception is very much, unless we go through a rigorous process of spiritual training, is that most people remain self-deceived, and that we have spiritual blind spots. Just as with our vision, is that if you put a dot on a piece of paper and you hold it close enough, even though it's right before you, because of the ways because of how we see that, it'll reach a certain point where you don't see the dot. It's there, but it's missing. We have these blind spots as well, in the spiritual sense, and that one of the things that the path of realization is that you start to see everything else, that everything else rather reminds you of your own state. In other words, we're introspective. One of the writers used to say that I used to know my state by the way that my riding beast would act towards me. So that if he found that when he got on his horse it was recalcitrant, it wasn't obeying, that he would take that as a sign that he might have sinned. That if he found that some of his kids were misbehaving, or that one of his servants did something inappropriate, that was a sign that maybe there's something wrong with them. Now, if you think about that how different is that from the state of the Ummah of our Prophet ﷺ today? Is that we oftentimes are very quick to point fingers at the others. And yes, that we have to have calculated social critique. And we have to have in a very calculated way, ways of articulating our faith and know what is taking place in the Muslim world. And we have to be aware of our time, absolutely. But there's a difference between doing that and between just always pointing the fingers and complaining. Our strength is in that we look to our own selves. And one of the great proofs of that is in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told us is that the various nations would gather together against us like the way that people gather together to eat from a plate. And then the Sahaba, what was the first thing that they said? That, is it because we will be few on that day, O Messenger of Allah? Meaning is that it didn't have anything to do with the outer aspect of those other people. It was related to them. Is it because we are few? Right? That was a part of the way that they viewed the world. Is that they saw themselves, and that this is why that Shaykh Abu Hassan al-Nadwi has a beautiful book about this. That ماذا خسر العالم بانحطاط المسلمين. That what has the whole world lost with the decadence of the believers, of Muslims. And that in the end, that we need to blame ourselves, and that we've become stagnant as an ummah. And as long as that we're in the situation that we're in, and that not every place in the Muslim world, but most places in the Muslim world, is that are really truly intelligent and gifted people are going into engineering and medicine and every other profession other than learning the deen, which all of those are furud kifayat, and they're extremely important, and we don't belittle those whatsoever. They're very important. They're fard kifayats. However, not at the expense of the deen. Is that the deen, until we understand, is that religious knowledge is superior, period. And without it, none of the other knowledge can truly be used in its proper context. If you look at the hadith of Rasulullah, that when he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, wisdom is the dala. What is a dala? Originally the Arabs use this for a lost sheep, right? That a sheep that just got lost from the flock, and that it belongs to someone, but it's lost. Then it's used for any property that you own that you lose. Our Prophet is teaching us here is that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. Meaning what he's indicating here, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that there is a relationship of ownership, right? Meaning that Muslims, in a sense, own wisdom. But what does it mean to own wisdom? Right? In order to own that wisdom, that you have to be able to integrate that individual piece of wisdom into a worldview of Tawheed. If you're not interviewing that wisdom into a worldview of Tawheed, you're not fulfilling what our Prophet ﷺ is saying. Right? If you integrate that wisdom into a kafir way to view the world, right? Or a Eurocentric way to view the world, then that you are not following the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And you could quote the hadith all day long and quote the hadith even though it's weak, to seek knowledge even into China, but you're not going to get the whole fruit of exactly what our Prophet ﷺ is saying. It becomes the wisdom of the believer when you take that individual piece of wisdom and then you integrate it into a worldview of Tawheed, right? Where you've now taken that uprooted it from its source and reappropriated it for the benefit of people, and everything that process requires, which you would need a long discussion to discuss what are the preconditions and how do you actually do this. But unfortunately, that this is not something that we oftentimes are even aware of. And one of the scariest tendencies of our time is that some of the people that are claiming to be the people that follow the Salaf and the early people are the most modern of all Muslims, which is really something that is mind-blowing. How you can think that you are following the Salaf, in reality, is that you've taken on tendencies that developed in the 19th century and the 20th century that have nothing to do with Islam for the most part and are very foreign. And that's a very scary thing. And this is why knowledge is so important. That we have to be people of knowledge. And what is going to root your studies in knowledge is being grounded in the deen. If you get grounded in the deen, khalas. I asked one of the righteous, when I was just getting back into the whole other side of things after I'd spent a few years getting some very basic knowledge overseas, coming back and entering into the university system here, just about this, and he said to me, he says, what does Allah Ta'ala say to Moses? That he says, خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَافْ سَنَعِيدَهَا سِيرَتِهِ الْأُولَى. And here that obviously this is in the primary references to the serpent that Moses, that was, the staff rather, that Moses was going to cast, that was going to turn into the serpent that ate the other sorcerers, what appeared to be serpents. But he says here the ha, that it refers as well to the asbab, to the means. And so he says, خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَافْ. Right? Take them, وَلَا تَخَافْ. Don't fear. سُنِعِيدُهَا سِيرَتِهَا الْأُولَى. We will return them, right, to the way that they were before. Meaning is that a Muslim, if you enter into any of the means with strong iman and with being rooted in your deen, you will benefit from everything. And whatever it is that you're in, it could be turned in that sense the way that it will be turned into a way that will come back to benefit you in the deen. Right? But there has to be that prerequisite though of being grounded. And then after that, enter into the Maidan and to start integrating knowledge. But this is really what is key. So that here that he goes on to then say, then he hates in people things he himself does. La ilaha illallah. That he offends those sharing his company. Is that part of the state of the believer is that we should be very light. Adillatin ala al-mu'minin. That we should be humble before the believers. That we're with the believers, we should deal with our brothers and sisters in a way that creates amiability, familiarity, and creates love and friendships. Our Prophet ﷺ said, "La khayra fi man la ya'laf wa la yu'laf." That there's no good in anyone that doesn't befriend others or allow himself to be befriended. Ulfa is familiarity. So meaning is that there's some people that carry themselves in a way is that they don't let anyone get close to them. Now, obviously, people live in different environments. And there's times where people are like wolves, and you have to howl like a wolf to protect yourself from their wolf-like nature. I mean, that's there. However, at the same time, is that sometimes you have to keep up your defense system, but you also have to have times when people check and get past that first check, and then you can let them close to you, and you can open up. This is from the traits of the believers. Or that he discusses other people's business when it is not his concern. Were this to be one of the only hadith of our Prophet ﷺ that we act upon. This is not a hadith here, but the hadith that says that min husn al-Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni la hawla wa la quwwata billah. From the good Islam of a man is for him to leave that which does not concern him. And what in the end of the day really concerns us? In the end of the day, what really concerns us is that this is human nature. Is that we're just always, wanting to know what's going on. We hear sirens that we want to look out, right? That we see an ambulance pass by, what's going on, right? We hear some voices screaming that we want to, we're just by nature always wanting to know what is going on and this type of thing. And if it doesn't concern you, khalas, leave it. Focus on what concerns you. That there was one of the scholars from the place that I studied. He lived in Indonesia for a long period of time, and there was a very wealthy Chinese merchant who lived right across from him, such that when this man left, that he would be literally looking at the doorstep of this Chinese merchant, and that this Chinese merchant noticed that every time that this scholar would go outside of his home, that even though that he had a very beautiful decorated house, he said never once did he even look at the door of the Chinese merchant. He said every time he walked out, he was every time he walked out, he would just keep walking. Never once did he, by nature this is, oh, look at that house, that's amazing. Look at that door. Never once did he even look at the door of the house, and just went about his way. And this is why the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that when he used to walk, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is that he would look straight ahead, or he would look up. That he would not turn to the right or turn to the left, unless someone called him or something, and then when he would turn completely, give himself fully to that person who called. He was a determined person. That when he used to walk, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, yes, there was a miracle in the way that he used to walk, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would that allow him to travel very quickly, and the earth would fold up for him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the Sahaba would have to walk quickly to even keep up with him. And that he's described as walking, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as if that he's walking down a slope. Right, so if you're walking down the slope, normally that you would put the balls of your feet first, right, and then your heels would follow. The Prophet, when he would walk, he would put the balls of his feet first, like this, when he would walk. And he's noted to that have swayed slightly from side to side when he would walk. He had a very amazingly graceful walk, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the point is, part of the meaning of that too is that he was a person of resolution. Whenever he would go from point A to point B, boom, he never wanted to remain idle, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That idleness is poisonous to most people. We should never be idle. We should always be doing something. And I learned one of these meanings from one of my teachers. We were in Indonesia, and that we were going from this place where there was a retreat where there was lectures and so forth, and we were going to the airport. And that I was getting some stuff together, so they were waiting in the car for me for about a minute or 2 minutes. And as soon as I get in the car, that my teacher said to me, basically hurry up. Like, what do you do? Basically hurry up. And in my mind, that I was wondering about, even though I was getting the bags, but the meaning that I took from it is that in that moment when you're idle, that you're very susceptible to shaitan. Is that you should always put your time, why is it that, if you have a 7-hour flight anyway, let's say you're going to London or something, you have a 7.5-hour flight ahead of you, that flights, you might get idle on the flight, but why is it that if your takeoff is delayed for like an hour, like that hour of sitting there waiting to take off is much harder on you than an hour that if you're in the air? It's an hour is an hour. What's the difference, right? Why is it that that's so hard on you? Why is it that an hour sitting in line is so hard on you, as opposed to that, or an hour in traffic, as opposed to, there's something about that idle time that psychologically it affects us, and it makes us susceptible to certain things that are distance us from the meanings of deen. And so that we should be very careful to have things done. And this is why that one of them, they used to say about Shaykh al-Ja'fari, one of the great mashayikh of Egypt, and that he had outwardly thousands and thousands of students. But one time someone asked him how many students he has, and he says that he's a student, and he's a student, and he's half a student. Hey, what about the others? Right? He mentioned 2.5 people, and he said, what about all the others? And what the meaning behind it is that oftentimes you have a teacher that has a lot of students, but only a few of them are real students. The others, he's just keeping them out of trouble. And they say that one of the greatest wisdoms of the awliya and the ulama is that they just keep people out of trouble. And that it's very clear in their mind is that when they come to know so-and-so, that so-and-so is not a student of knowledge, nor are they really an aspirant in that sense, a murid. Right? So they just need to be kept out of trouble. And if someone is just kept out of trouble in their life, it's a great blessing. Because our nature is that al-nafs and lam tushghulhu bil khair shaghlatka bi shar. If you don't preoccupy it with good, it will preoccupy with evil. So just keeping people that out of trouble actually is a good thing. And that having an apparatus to just do that. I mean, one of the ways that people fall in prey to the shayateen is idleness. That we should strive to have a community, to have a way where we're not idle at all, and that we always do something what is appropriate to be done in its particular time. But leaving that which doesn't concern us, what in the end really concerns us? That's a big question. If you look at Imam al-Ghazali's definition, we're all in trouble. Because the only thing that concerns us is your akhirah and what you need from the dunya to prepare for it. That in reality is what concerns you. Your akhirah and everything that you need to do to prepare for it. And what you necessarily need from the dunya to help you get along. Everything else is superfluous. And these meetings, even if we can't implement them fully, at least that we have to be aware of them. So.
Use your intellect to worship God by not being obsessed with your plans.
Okay. MashaAllah. These are very short statements, but you can see that they're packed with meaning. That he says, وَاسْتَعْمِلِ اللَّهِ عَقْلَكَ بِتَرْكِ التَّدْبِيرِ. So he says here that use your intellect, right, to worship God or for the sake of Allah, by not being obsessed with your plans. Tadbir is planning. And that one of the things about tadbir, planning, is that at the lower stations of religious realization, is that people oftentimes are obsessed with planning. Is that they try to micromanage their lives in such a way that they end up having bad adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that the reason that we can't fully micromanage our lives is because that we are limited in what we can actually know. There are so many unknown factors to any decision that we make, or any plans that we make, is that it only makes sense to rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely in any decision. Because there's just too many unknown factors. And that there is a difference between that making a decision based upon that a calculated, intelligent, thoughtful process, in between that relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through which if you do that, all of the unknown factors will have been taken into consideration. What's an example of that? Okay, so that if I'm going to get on Highway 1, for instance, and I guess that I just, I go out to Oxford Street here, I turn right, and I go down a couple blocks, I make another right, and I turn right, I turn left, I'm on Highway 1. I forget the names of the streets. Is that correct? Right. So that's normally what you would do, right? Or let's say that there's traffic and you make a certain plan to avoid the traffic based upon your own calculation. That's a good thing to do. However, that you still have to rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that, let's say that you're relying upon Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and that for some reason that it's going to be such that there's going to be an explosion. Actually, we shouldn't be talking about explosions. People get very uncomfortable with those type of words nowadays. This is a real story. Someone actually sent a text message to his business partner who was on his way to New York to blow away the competition. And they did not let them in the United States of America because of that text. I mean, anyways, it's pretty ridiculous, but things as ridiculous as this do happen. Anyhow, let's say that there would be a fire or whatever, something terrible was going to happen, and that there's no way for you to take that into consideration. And that meaning is that you could have good plans, but there's no way for you to possibly know that that's going to happen at that particular time, such that you would then avoid it. Right? Likewise in everything that we do in our life. That it might be that you feel that you're going to that job where you're going to get a raise, and it looks like you're going to have a more comfortable environment that you're going to be in, and whatever it might be, but you don't know if that is better for you. Outwardly, you've thought it through, you've sought people's advice, it seems like it's going to be better. But how do you know that if you don't do that job, if you went to that job, is that you might receive a major tribulation that would be more difficult for you, and in the end worse for you than where you just stayed put where you were. We don't know these things, right? And from the blessing of Allah Ta'ala is that He's given us a way to have these factors be taken into consideration, because Allah knows everything. And if while doing all of your outward planning you trust in Allah Ta'ala, whatever it is that you do, qat'an, 100%, it will be what's best for you. No questions about it. Even if it's a tribulation, it will be good for you. And this is why that فَإِذَا هَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Once you have firm resolution, trust in Allah. The Prophet ﷺ made sure with the Sahaba for the Battle of Uhud. The Prophet ﷺ wanted to defend from within Medina. And many of the young Ansar wanted to go out to meet the enemy outside of Medina. In the end, the Prophet ﷺ, he was a person, يُقِيمَ الظَّاهِرِ, that he was a person who took Allah commanded him, like to وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, to seek their consultation in affairs. And that the Prophet then put on his 2 coats of armor, and he was walking out to battle in the morning, and at night some of these Sahaba started to think, what were we thinking? To suggest to the Prophet to go outside of Medina when he wanted to stay and defend from within. And so they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said that, Ya Rasulullah, let's defend from within. And the Prophet ﷺ said that مَا كَانَ لِلنَّبِيِّ مَا كَانَ يَنْبَغِي لِلنَّبِيِّ. It wasn't befitting of a prophet after they've worn their armor to take it off. Once you make a decision, khalas, you go through with that decision and you ride that decision out. And look what happened in the Battle of Badr. In the Battle of Uhud, is that in reality it was a victory. Why was it a victory? Because that were the Sahaba to have been taught that they could actually have an outward victory in disobeying the Prophet ﷺ, which is not from this event. This actually came from the archers on the mountain, but that it began in such a way as well. This whole event began in this way. But in the end, that, subhanAllah, that there's lessons that are learned from everything. In the end, what happens is what is best. Right? So that this is the balance. Because there's people that make decisions and then it haunts them for the rest of their life because of the decision that they made. And that think things through, deliberate. Hastiness is from shaitan. Pray istikhara up to 7 times. Seek the advice of good people who are going to give you good advice, not just the advice that you want to hear. And then, فَإِذَا عَزَّمْتَ, once you have resolution, فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Trust in Allah and go. Don't hold back at that time. If you waver, one extreme is to be too hasty and to jump into something. But another extreme is to waver after you know that the decision that you feel that you've come to that you should make. At that point, make that decision and go through with it. And ride it out till the end. And unless something major happens where you need to readjust. And this is the adab that we do. But all of this relates to the fact that our intellect is limited. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in 5 different times in the Quran, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows and you all do not know. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And then that as well, there oftentimes is good in things that we dislike. That Shaykh Hamza Yusuf mentions a quote here of Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab. He says, مَا أُبَالِ عَلَى أَيِّ حَالٍ أَصْبَحْتِ. Sayyidina Umar said that I don't care in any state, whatever state it is in the morning that I enter into the morning, I don't care. عَلَى مَا أُحِبْ أَمْ عَلَى مَا أَكْرَهُ. Whether it's in a state that I actually like or it's a state that I dislike. وَذَلِكَ لِأَنِّي لَا أَدْرِي الْخَيْرَ فِيمَا أُحِبْ أَوْ فِيمَا أَكْرَهُ. And that is because is that I don't know is the good in what I like or what I don't like. But that's not easy. And then in this same regard, okay, then that's coming. Anyway. And then the verse in the Quran, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون. Perhaps that you dislike something and it is good for you. And perhaps that you love something and it is not good for you. Allah knows and you do not. Allah knows, you do not. That's why is that we have to have tawakkul. What is the reality of tawakkul? Its reality is in that moment when you're going to make a decision, or even if you're going to enter into a class just before you pray, and all of our different affairs, is that we relinquish our own power and realize that we are ultimately weak, and that we go in with a deep sense of trust in the heart. We bring to heart a sense of trust in Allah Ta'ala. And you will find that before you make wudu, before you pray, before you study, before you teach, before you pray Taraweeh, whatever it is that you do, trust in Allah Ta'ala, and you will see ajaib, wonders of the way it's facilitated for you. If you ever feel like in Taraweeh and Rak'ah 13 that you're just about to collapse, right, in that moment, that trust in Allah, turn to Allah, give me strength. You will find wonders of all these types of things, and the way that things are facilitated for you in amazing ways. But it requires that a deep sense of trust at the heart level.
Rely on God, that He will ward off from you the harm contained in the divine ordainment.
And okay. Okay, I think there's he has the harm in brackets here, so I think maybe in another edition, ala sarfi sharr al-muqadiyah, right? And that this is the beautiful thing, is that what has been decreed, that has been decreed. You can't change it. But one of the du'as is you ask Allah to ward off from you the shar, the evil of the decree. Now the decree in of itself is not evil, because good and evil applies to our action. Good and evil does not apply to Allah Ta'ala. Okay? So what it means here is the shar, the evil of that which has been decreed, is the way that you respond to it, and the implications of your response, and whether it brings about good for you or bad for you. And so in one of the du'as that we say, it's a prophetic du'a. Allahumma inni as'aluka khair hadha al-yawm, fathu wa nasru wa nuru wajhika. Allahumma inni as'aluka khair hadha al-yawm, wa khair ma fihi, wa khair ma qablahu, wa khair ma ba'dahu. Oh Allah, I ask you the good of this day, the good of what came before this day, and the good of what comes after this day. Like, understanding how you're asking for the good of this day, that makes sense. Understanding for asking for the good of tomorrow and what comes after, that makes sense. How are you going to ask Allah Ta'ala for the good of what came before? It's already done. So how could you ask for something that was already done? Meaning, of everything that came before you, ask Allah Ta'ala for the khair of it. Meaning, is that even if you committed sin, that hopefully that you will be given the khair of that sin that you committed. Some might say, astaghfirullah. How could you have khair in a sin? A sin's a sin, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is, if a sin makes you then make a tawbah nasuh, that was a sin, khalas. Right? In of itself. But if you ask Allah Ta'ala for the khair of what came before, of everything, even a sin, that you might do khair based upon a sin you committed in the past. Just as you might do shar based upon a good deed that you committed in the past. So we ask Allah Ta'ala for the khair of what came before. And that meaning what came before, if it was sin, it motivates us to tawbah. That if it's good, it motivates us to shukr. Or whatever it might be. And then in a deeper metaphysical sense, the barakah, that yasri, that there be a flowing blessing that extends into our endeavors that we're doing in the present. Okay? Now,
Imam Ali said, Imam Ali said, O son of Adam, do not delight in wealth, and do not be overwhelmed with grief when you are afflicted with poverty. Do not be saddened by tribulations.
So Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib, Babu Madinat al-Ilm, he was the gate to the citadel of knowledge. And he said, O son of Adam, do not delight in wealth. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That if you think and you hear these statements, it's almost like these people are superhuman. Who wouldn't delight in wealth? If someone came right now and gave you $10,000, right? Who wouldn't be happy? Right? What kind of human being is that actually is that to them dirt and money are the same thing? They don't delight in it whatsoever. What kind of human being is that? Right? There's people that are alive. I mean, that's, when the Prophet ﷺ met Haritha one morning, كيف أصبحت يا حارثة? Right? How are you doing this morning? He said, Ya Rasulullah, أصبحت مؤمنا حقا. O Messenger of Allah, I've entered into the morning as a true believer. We've all heard this. But what was one of the signs of his being a true believer? فَاسْتَوْ عِنْدِي, that the dunya, عَزَفَتْ نَفْسِي عَنِ الدُّنْيا, myself has turned away from the dunya. فَاسْتَوْ عِنْدِي ذَهَبُهَا وَمَدْرُهَا, that its gold and its dust is the same to me. At least, we can develop a policy that, we try to give some of our wealth out. If we can't reach that point where, it's the same whether we have money or we don't have money, being cognizant at least that we know that we really shouldn't be just overindulging in the dunya is a good thing. And then if they can cause that to allow us to give out part of our wealth, then that's also a good thing. They used to say about Sayyidina Hassan bin Ali that قَاسَمَ اللَّهَ فِي مَالِهِ مَرَّتَيْنِ. He said twice in his life he gave away half of everything he owned. That he reached a point he said, I'm giving away 50% of everything. Right? Meaning is that if someone has 2 cars, one's going. If they have 2 houses, one's going. Right? If they have $20,000 in the bank, 10,000 is going. If half of his clothes, all of his wealth added up, he gave half of it. Twice in his entire life. And if we can't do that, yallah, 5%, 1%. At least, zakat is the bare minimum. And if you don't give zakat, that's the worst type of bukhl possible, is to not to give, right, something that's not even yours to begin with, because it's the haqq that's actually owned by the poor, it's not your wealth. That's the worst type of bukhl, of miserliness. But at least something on top of that. Zakat is the bare minimum. There's a difference between remaining within the bounds of Islam, which will lead to salvation. But if you want sanctification, that you want the higher degrees of paradise, that subjectively each and every single one of us will experience Yawm al-Qiyamah between 2 light rak'ahs or 50,000 years. 2 light rak'ahs to 50,000 years is a continuum based upon the level of our belief and our amal salih. 2 light rak'ahs, everyone has to experience Yawm al-Qiyamah. And everyone has to pass across the nar. وَمَا مِنْكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا كَانَ عَلَى رَبِّكَ حَتْمًا مَقْضِيًّا. That every one of you will come to it. Right? This is a definite decree from your Lord. Right? ثُمَّ نُنَجِّي الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. Then we will save the people that had taqwa. Everyone has to pass over the fire. Right? And everyone has to experience Yawm al-Qiyamah. But to what degree is that experience going to be? Right? What's going to determine that is taqwa. The level of our belief and the level of our amal salih. And this is where we have a choice that we make. And that everyone makes a conscious choice of what we can, how we want to experience that. So then he says that, and do not be overwhelmed with grief when you are afflicted with poverty. And that's something difficult. And there used to be something in this country, in other places in the world, that still exists, called honorable poverty. And that there was a sense, because America wasn't, it wasn't always like this. But if you look back at, we were just at this hotel in Orlando, and we're looking at all these old pictures from like the 30s and the 40s. I mean, they look like Muslims in the way they're dressed. Right? The men all have hats on. Yes, they might not be a kufi, but they all have hats on. The women could not go outside without something on top of their head. They all are wearing dresses. They're all wearing. It's simply the only things that are really showing, They're not wearing hijab, so a little bit of the hair, but other than that, the face and the hands. You know, and there was a tradition here. For though, I mean, my grandfather passed away at the age of 100 a few years ago, that it was very different, the type of life that they lived. You know, there was what was called, they had a sense of muru'ah. There was a legal respectability. There was an honor to the way that the family name and so forth. It was very similar to a traditional culture in the Muslim world. Now things have gone haywire, and you know, we were Generation X, and the sign of Generation X, we were the MTV generation. Then you have, I'm serious about this, you have Generation Y, and the sign of Generation Y was the Internet generation. And now you have Generation Z, and the sign of Generation Z is the smartphone generation. And then now they're talking about that to start from the beginning. Alpha. Generation Alpha is coming as well too. God knows what's going to be their state. But you know, it's just amazing how people get disconnected from, you know, you even see it. You see it in one generation where their parents, their parents were really the highest people. You know, and they come to the States, and they completely lose their children in one generation. Whoosh, wiped off their feet in one generation, where their parents, children turn out totally different. That is very scary. It's very scary. So, but what he's saying here, though, is that. Oh, we were talking about poverty. So there was a sense of honorable poverty, right? And that it's very important too that we see things with the worldview of our Prophet ﷺ and the worldview of the Quran, because the nature of the Book of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, it teaches us to respect people that are poor, and that in fact is that the Prophet ﷺ chose to remain in a state of poverty by his choice, by his choice, and he made du'a that he be raised in the circle of the masakin, the impoverished. And so that you know, this was, you know, we should feel a natural affinity. If someone yastankif and doesn't want to be around poor people, there's something, that's a serious disease in the heart. Is that we should get beyond even like cringing over that, where you're actually comfortable in that. And that one of the amazing things is some of the greatest awliya and ulama of our ummah throughout the centuries until recent times, is that you'll find that extremely poor people frequenting their majlis all the time. That these are the true inheritors of Rasulullah, that have attained the highest level of inheritance. Is that it's just, you know, they might be well off themselves, right? But they're always there with the poor. And some of my teachers, I've seen them, they're like this. And my teachers' I've heard about them, that they're like this. And that one of my teachers, have Ibrahim bin Umar bin Aqil, is that he used to have a zawiyah where they would study, and is that it would be open 24/7. He would serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, anytime that anyone wanted to come and to learn or to eat, or the door was open. You know, and unfortunately, that it's a bit harder to do that here, because you're a bit worried about who would come through the door. The societies were a bit safer than here, but at least you want to potentially be like that. You know, where you can be there for the people. Do not be saddened by tribulations. La ilaha illallah. This is the advice of Sayyidina Ali, but this is not easy to do, not easy to implement.
Do not be overly pleased by easy times. Verily, gold is tested for its purity by fire. Likewise, a righteous servant is tested by tribulations.
If you want to know something's true gold, that you have to put it to the fire. And these people, because there used to actually be gold coins and silver coins, and that there used to actually be master, so we used to know what was a fake gold coin and what was a real gold coin, and they had a way and a process of doing it. Anyhow, if you put true gold to the fire, it becomes more pure. False gold, that paradise. It just melts away, and its true nature comes out. And so that tribulations are not something nice. They're difficult for us to bear. It's bitter. However, that we benefit greatly from them. And if you've noticed, if you've been through a great tribulation, if you went and you survive that tribulation, you come out strong oftentimes. Oftentimes, if you responded to that tribulation correctly for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, you come out strong. And I was reading in a book by Guy Eaton some time ago, where he was talking about this individual that just had the easiest life. He never had financial problems. He never had any sicknesses, that he always was in a state of comfort. And he's like painting this portrait where you're like, oh, that would be nice. And then he says that this was the most immature person I've ever met in my life. Right? And so there's something about tribulation and maturity. Is that one of the great blessings is that you go through tribulation, you come out mature. And obviously as well, there are people that go through tribulations that come out very hard, and it has a negative impact upon them, but because of the way they respond to that tribulation. But if we respond correctly to the tribulation, is that it will benefit us in a way. And one of the greatest benefits of tribulation of all is that if Allah Ta'ala loves you, He does not want you to love this dunya. And that having tribulations, and if you have a life full of tribulations, who's going to want to stay in an abode that's the abode of tribulations? Right? It's a mechanism for you to detach. Because who wants to stay with tribulations? And as long as we're here in this world, this is the abode of turbidity. This is the abode of tribulation. This is the abode of difficulty and sadness. And there is no utopia in the dunya. Abadan. There's no way. There is no utopia in the dunya. And that any type of, and many Muslims have fallen into this, in the 20th century in particular, of developing a utopian type of world that's going to happen, as that when we create a revolution and we throw a coup and then we have a Muslim government, and then all of a sudden everything's going to be in line and everything's going to be rosy. That's very foreign to the way that we see things. There is no utopia here in this world. Right? So to try to build an ideology built upon a utopian worldview is total nonsense for us. Is that yes, that we do the best given our circumstance, but there is no utopia in this world, and there's not supposed to be. But the beauty of it is that even people that were against each other in this world, is that in the next world it's not going to be like that. If even your arch enemy, if both of you make it to paradise, right? وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّنْ غِلٍّ, that we removed all of the rancor that was in their hearts. إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ, they will be brothers on couches facing one another. Right? Even your worst enemies, that if they are believers and they enter into paradise, then you won't have that feeling of it's him, right? It's her. Right? There won't be any of that in the heart. It'll be all purity. People will just be enjoying the wonders and the pleasures of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's paradise. And then we'll end with this last statement here.
You will never attain what you desire except by leaving off what you have a strong craving for.
La ilaha illallah. You will never attain what you desire except by leaving off what you have a strong craving for. MashaAllah. And then that you will not reach the level you anticipate except through persevering with what is displeasing to you. Now this is in the dunya and this is in the deen. Is that you cannot become a successful businessman by sitting home and being a couch potato. No, you have to work hard. I think it was Thomas Edison who said, that the one who invented a number of things, Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Right? Meaning that people think that, oh, he's just a genius and he kind of sits back and develops the light bulb. Right? No. Right? Yes, he's a genius, but this person exerted himself immensely. That if you look at the early scholars, don't think that Imam Shafi developed the Risala just in one night. Right? Hours and hours and days and years of incredibly hard work over a long period of time with zuhud, in complete sincerity, and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and patience. And then you have the risala. Right? That if you see someone like Murabit al-Hajj, one of the great awliya of the ummah, you see people that are like that, great scholars, they do not come out of a vacuum. They've spent years and years and years in every stage of their life. There was something that they were focusing on. Early on in the first stages, it's a hifd al-Quran, and then it's hifd al-mutun, and then it's a lot of mutala, and then it's teaching, and then they have different stages in their lives. That then, over the long period of time, collectively, all of these experiences and everything that they did led to who they were in the end. Right? This is a long process. It's not something that happens overnight. And then finally, exert your utmost in guarding the obligations God has made incumbent upon you. That the obligations are the most important aspect of our worship, and that one of the secrets why that the fard is worth 70 times that of the nafilah is because that the fard prayer is a lot harder on the nafs. That a fard prayer where that you know that if you would say, for instance, that you have qada. I don't know about the other schools, but in the Shafi school you can't pray nafilah if you have qada. So that if you pray tarawih in the Shafi school, someone praying the fard can pray behind someone who's praying nafilah in the Shafi school. In the Maliki school you can't. I don't know about the Hanafi school. But if you were going to pray a day's worth of qada, right, which is what? Which is 17 rak'ahs. That 17 rak'ahs of qada, how much harder is it to do that than it is to pray 20 rak'ahs of tarawih? It's much more difficult on you. Well, it's the same rak'ahs. Why is it harder to pray fard qada than it is to pray nafilah? Right? Why is it so light when you get up, you finish your Isha prayer, you pray two quick rak'ahs, or you pray 2 quick rak'ahs of Maghrib? Right? Why is it so light but the fard is heavy? Right? It's because of the burden of the fard, because you have no choice here. And in general, that the way that we've been created is that we don't like, our nafs doesn't like to be told what to do, so it's heavy upon it. Obligations are heavy on it. Right? And because of that there's more reward in it. Because this is the essence of deen. The essence of deen is to change you, to, rewire you at the deepest biological, neurological, spiritual, every level of your body in being, to rewire you into the divine will. That's the whole purpose. And for those of you that are in college, and that you're asked challenging questions like that, why is it haram for Muslims to eat pork? Yes, at times scholars might have mentioned certain things, okay, the type of meat, the nature of the pig, and so forth. But someone might say, well, what if actually more people die from overeating beef than pig? So technically, according to that rationale, beef should be impermissible as well. That even though there are rationales to aspects of the law, the underlying purpose of every single religious ruling in the Sharia is to teach you submission, and is to make and to protect you from the caprice of your own soul, and that it is to make you into that type of person, and that this is the essence of deen, is that. And this is why that our Prophet ﷺ says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. None of you will truly believe, none of you will attain the perfection of faith until what? His hawa, his desire is in accordance with what I've brought. Meaning that you've transformed. Is it what you want is what Allah and His Messenger wants, and you've made that transformation. Meaning it's also a process. Hatta is a harf ghaya. It happens at the very end. That you'll go through a process, go through a process, and struggle, until that will be the result. But this is at the very essence of religion, and this is why that the scholars said, is that قطرة من الهواء تفسد بحرا من العلم. One drop of caprice, of passion, of desire can corrupt an entire ocean of knowledge. And this is a very, very, very dangerous thing, and this is why that the essence of the Sharia is about tahdhib, that what was the fundamentals, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُزَكِّيكُمْ. Now, this is the essence of the prophetic message, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. كَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا فِيكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْكُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِنَا وَيُزَكِّيكُم. Right, and that He purifies you. He purifies you from shirk, yes, He purifies you from disease of the heart, but all of these things that then pollute the human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us to taste the sweetness of this blessed month of Ramadan, and assist us in our fast, assist us in it, assist us in understanding the prayers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us to find the sweetness in the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all of the gems of meaning that He disseminates to the elect of His creation. Ya Rabbil Alameen, may we be from those people who understand the Quran, have ta'aleem for the Quran, understand the secrets of the Quran, and recite the Quran, and find a beauty in that recitation of the Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the Quran to mix with our flesh, blood, and blood, and live and die upon His deen. Devote ourselves completely to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bless us to be able to submit inward and outwardly, and bless our hawa to be tabi' lima ja'a bihi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Fill our hearts with the love of Allah and His Messenger. Have long, productive lives in the state of obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always, may Allah ta'ala always find us where He's commanded us to be, and never find us where He has prevented us and prohibited us from being. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Inshallah, we'll be reading Surah Waqi'ah for about 10 more minutes, inshallah. And we're going to read some of the adhkar of the evening. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة. إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثا فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكرون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم إن هذا له حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب والله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون فتعالى الله الملك الحق لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم ومن يدعو مع الله إلها آخر لا معاد له فيه فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين فسبحان الله حين تصبحون وحين تصبحون والحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيه وحين تظهرون يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. اللهم إني أمسيت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم من نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أمسيت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم من نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أمسيت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم من نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أمسيت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أمسيت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أمسيت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أمسيت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بجبر الطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بجبر الطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بجبر الطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا بسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا بسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا بسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. 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 اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت. أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم. ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله تعالى بكل شيء علما. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي ومن شر كل دابة أنت آخذ من نصيحتها إن ربي على صراط مستقيم. يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث من عذابك أستجير. أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي ولا إلى أحد من خلقك تفتحين. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن وأعوذ بك من عجز الكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وكهل الرجال. اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم أسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والأهل والمال. اللهم اللهم استر عوراتي وآمن روعاتي. اللهم اغفر من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي، وأعوذ بعظمتك أن تغالب تحتي. اللهم أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني وأنت تميتني وأنت تحييني وأنت على كل شيء قدير. أمسينا على فكرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى ملة أبينا إبراهيم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. اللهم بك أمسينا، بك أصلحنا، بك نحيا، بك نموت، وإليك نتوكل وإليك المصير. أمسينا أمسى الملك لله والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم نسألك خير هذه الليلة فتحها ونصرها ونورها وبركاتها وهداها. اللهم نسألك خير هذه الليلة، خير ما فيها وخير ما قبلها وخير ما بعدها، وأعوذ بك من شر هذه الليلة وشر ما فيها وشر ما قبلها وشر ما بعدها. اللهم ما أمسى بمن نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك، فلك الحمد ولك الشكر على ذلك. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله عدد ما خلق السماء، سبحان الله عدد ما خلق الأرض، سبحان الله عدد ما بين ذلك، سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق. الحمد لله عدد ما خلق السماء، الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض، الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك، الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق السماء، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خالق. الله أكبر عدد ما خلق السماء، الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض، الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك، الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق السماء، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وعلى كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وعلى كل شيء قدير. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وعلى كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في الله. الصلاة والسلام الدائمين دوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد كل ذرة مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في الله. الصلاة والسلام الدائمين دوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في الله. الصلاة والسلام الدائمين دوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة.